Hello and welcome to another lap guide for the iRacing Camel GT series. This week we're at Okayama. Here's the lap first. All right, lap time there is a 1:18.600. So let's go ahead and jump back to the start of the lap and go through this in more detail turn by turn. A couple of quick notes about the track and the setup before we do that. So I'm running more of a high downforce setup here for this track, and what I found is that tire wear should definitely be something in your back of your mind when you're racing here, and that over the course of a race, if you're pushing the tires a little bit too hard, you're going to see your pace fall off a bit as the tires start to underperform a bit. And so you definitely want to try to avoid overworking and pushing too hard and braking too late and trying to carry just too much speed in some cases into corners where initially when the tires are fresh it may feel as though the car can handle that just fine, but I think that if you're pushing beyond the limits just a little bit too much and for too long, that you'll see that in the following corners you'll feel grip kind of fall off a bit where you've kind of overworked the tires a bit. So the track can be fairly hard on the tires, and so I'm running a very high downforce setup with the car, and I feel like I've adjusted the setup to kind of help minimize the tire wear a bit, where I felt like I was able to run kind of a steady pace for a longer session with race fuel. So we'll see how that goes throughout the races. So we have late afternoon weather. The default weather that I ran for the session here is 87 Fahrenheit track temp, and you can see the splits there with 118.2 optimal for the testing that I did here. So let's go ahead and go through this turn by turn now in more detail. Actually, also just another quick note is that I'm not using first gear at all in this setup. I've got kind of a short second gear that I'm using, so I'm just using second through fifth, and so you won't see me going into first gear at any point here. There really aren't any corners where the car gets really slow enough to make a first gear make a lot of sense to me, and so I'm not using first gear at all. So coming down to turn one, the braking point here is really kind of in between the 100 and the tower that you have here up on the left. You can also see where you've got some patches or some skid marks here on the road. That could also be treated as a brake point, but I wouldn't rely on that alone. If you have a car ahead of you, he's going to obviously obstruct those from your view, and so try to get the timing to somewhere between the 100 and the board there. You'll see that I'll actually get on brakes a little bit before that midpoint, and then you can see a kind of a quick hard 80% or so threshold brake right in between. It may be slightly closer to the tower than the midpoint there, but that's where my threshold brake point is there. Keeping the car left here real close to the dirt, patient on turn in. And as you're turning in and downshifting here into second, the goal here should be to reach the curb right at about where you can see the dirt patch here closer to the edge of the curb, and that's right at about the apex that you want to hit there. You can see how I kind of come up and maybe lightly touch the dirt there. The limits to the track surface on this track are very loose as far as off tracks are concerned, and so you can actually get well up here into the dirt or grass area without an off track, but not necessarily quicker to do so. But I like to use all of the curbing here on the entry to get a kind of a nice tight turn in here, so that as I come off the curbing, I can get on throttle and kind of let the car run out wide here to carry speed through. Now, as you're coming back to throttle here, not only because it's kind of a shorter second gear, but also you're going to be kind of continuously turning. You want to be real careful about committing back to full throttle here, where you can not only run into traction loss issues, but it can actually be difficult if you're carrying too much speed to get set up for turn 2. So that should be on your mind already, is getting the car back over to the right as soon as you can, up to where you can see the green surface here to the right is kind of where your target, where you want to get the car back to for turn 2. And so getting back to throttle and aiming to get to that point. I don't think I'd reach full throttle until I get right up into third here, and then I can steer the car over to the right. So let's play turn 1 at speed first before we go through turn 2. All right, so the turn-in point for turn 2 is probably right at about the point where the road actually starts to widen a little bit here, where you can see the surface come up. That's where I'm actually aiming to reach and to also turn in. And so I don't use the extra surface there because I've already turned in prior to that, but I am getting the car right up to the grass to make sure that I'm opening up the corner to carry as much speed through it as possible. And I try to think a little bit more about taking maybe a slightly later apex here, mainly because if you apex too soon, it's going to cost you some speed in having to kind of adjust your line at mid corner, and also maybe delay your throttle if you apex too soon. So you want to make sure that you're wide on entry and you're kind of apexing in to the latter part of the corner there, so that you can start to kind of ease on throttle. The only thing I typically do as I've lifted and turned in here is maybe slightly tap the brakes a bit, and just to kind of avoid running too wide and just kind of help rotate the car. The way I have the brake bias set up, it will help to rotate the car a bit mid-corner. So, and it is a little bit more rearward brake bias for that purpose. So I'll be just kind of tapping the brakes a bit here, making sure that I can get the car up onto the curbing here on this later apex, so that as I reach it and I get the car real close up to the edge there, that I can commit back to throttle. And obviously once you get to throttle, you want to be getting on throttle and rolling up to full throttle and not having to lift again, so that you can keep your speed up and not have to lift to avoid running too wide here on the exit of the corner. Now you can also here run actually all the way up to the gravel a bit, again without an off track. And so like I say, the limits of the surface are pretty forgiving here without getting a 1x. And so I think more than anything, it just helps to kind of avoid getting extra incident points, and also to avoid invalidating your qualifying laps, but not necessarily faster to use the gravel. I think that it just gives you a little bit of room for error. So let's go ahead and play that one through at speed. All right, so coming down to turn 4, Atwood curve. So for Atwood, what I found myself doing as I was kind of getting set up for the line, the braking point, was I would actually kind of clip the edge of the grass here to kind of make sure that I was real close to the left-hand side of the road here, and make sure I was using all of the road to open the corner up as much as possible. And now you can't hear it so much in this particular lap, because I didn't take too much grass there, but maybe just kind of a tip there that you could maybe try is that as you're making your move over to the left-hand side, if you just kind of lightly clip and get used to that kind of the feel of where that is and where you hear the tires just touching the grass there, then you'll know that as you kind of cross this corner, that you'll be pretty close to where you want to be for your braking zone. Because really, just as you've rounded the corner here, just past the 100, you're going to start to get into brakes, and you're going to threshold just before the 50 board. So there'll be about a 70-75% or so brake there, and that threshold I reached just before the 50. So it's important to make sure that, like I say, that you're not pushing your brake points too far back. Although you can kind of get away with it, and the tires will hold up. Initially, I think that you'll pay for that later on, as if you're overworking the tires a little bit too much on this track. So keeping the car left in the braking zone. The braking zone is actually fairly lengthy here. And then I'll actually lift and turn in. I don't know if there's like really a clear point as far as where I'm turning in, as far as visual references go. I guess you could look at it as maybe about midway through where you've got kind of more of a dirt patch here in the grass. It's really hard to spot anything specifically or specific in the replay that helps indicate that, but really just trying to be patient on turning in. The way that I'm turning in is to make sure that I can get to the curb here right about where you can kind of see a little bit of a later apex around the first corner, and where you can see more of a dirt patch here close to the edge. I want to make sure that I can turn in and reach that. The car, with the amount of speed you're carrying into the corner here, is going to kind of naturally run wide out toward the middle of the road here. But I like to angle it so that as I'm now getting on throttle, I can now get back to the curb here, or close to the curb here once again, and straighten up the car and ease into throttle. You can't commit to full throttle too soon here. It's a fairly lengthy corner where you're turning. But as you get closer to the curb, that to me now is a point where I can get pretty close to full throttle, where I know I'm not going to run too wide on the exit. And once I've straightened out and gotten to full throttle, I'll go ahead and use all of the road here on the left, mostly for safety. You could turn away from it a little sooner, but I just go ahead and use all of the road just to ensure that I'm not going to get any sort of oversteer and spin at all at that point, just to use all of the road that's available at that point. So let's go ahead and play this one through its speed. All right, so down into turn 5, the hairpin. The break point for the hairpin is it's between the 100 and the 50. The threshold point is about 80%, right there in between. It's probably a little closer to the 100. So if you kind of think about it as maybe reaching your threshold break just after the 100, then I think you'll be fine there. If you're too close to the 50 or the tower here on the left, then you really run a risk of running wide. And obviously, bear in mind this guide and all of my lap guides are with qualifying fuel as well. And so always keep that in mind, is that you might want to break or back them up a little bit with race fuel, and depending on the weather, if it's warmer, then obviously you'll back up the break points further if it's even warmer. So and also bear in mind your draft. I was reminded of that lesson in one of our last races last week, where I was braking. I had the draft from a car ahead, and I just braked too late, and that got me into trouble. So if you're behind a car, then obviously you're going to brake even further back. So you might be much closer to the 100 board, is where you might be threshold braking here, and just to keep that safe. Now, once I brake, I'm actually kind of now aiming toward about the midpoint here, right about the middle of the road here, where I'm going to kind of get the car pointed for the turn-in point. Now, you could potentially keep the car a little wider here, and I think you might with race fuel, because your turning radius won't be quite as tight here. But for me, with qualifying fuel, that was kind of a comfortable point where I felt like I could get turned in and reach my apex, which is again a late apex. You really want to late apex this, because the following corner you're setting up on the right-hand side of the road pretty quickly there. And so my goal is to get right down to the curbing here, and you'll see that the apex that I hit is probably really closer to just past this midpoint here, but you're really sacrificing the exit here to keep the car to the right. And you want to keep the car from going too far here on the left so that, again, this corner comes up, turn 6 comes up pretty quickly here. And you want to get back to the right and as close to the grass here as you can. And you see the turn-in point is already happening right here, just ahead of this dirt patch here to the right. So let's set this up and play this through here at speed. So as you're coming off this corner and you're rolling on throttle, be careful about committing back to full throttle as you're kind of coming up over the crest of this hill here. The car will lighten up and you'll get some rear wheel spin. And so you'll see that as I get back to throttle, I don't really get back to full at all. Get about 80 to 90% throttle here, and I never fully reach full throttle all the way up to the brake and turn-in point for turn 6. Now for turn 6, I actually took more grass here than I typically do. I will typically take some of the grass here, and again, this kind of helps show the racing, or I guess how forgiving it is on off tracks. So when you're coming across this corner here, I really am probably more of a full tire width further to the right, and maybe just taking just dropping a tire just over the other side of the curbing here. But I thought it was interesting to show how much grass you could take here without an off track. A few more inches over is 1x, and another few inches further there's actually a cut track penalty, and so you will get a cut track for taking too much more than that. So that is more than I typically would like to take there, and I decided to go ahead and use the lap because I figured, well, at least it helps kind of show the limits of the race surface there. But that is a little bit more than I would like to take there, and you can see how it doesn't unsettle the car too much. It does kind of help get you to the line onto the exit. Whereas you're coming off this corner, I like to straddle over the curb, get a tire well over into the concrete, the green painted concrete surface here. So really just thinking about getting close all the way to the dirt here on the right, and aiming to go straight off of that to the curbing to the left, or the curbing to the right, and I don't turn in until I've actually reached this curbing. And so you can see how I'm kind of coming up and turning in on that curbing there, and then aiming to use all of the curbing to the left, and again all the way to the right. So you want to make sure that your throttle point coming off of the corner here is just as you're coming off the curbing here to the left. So starting to ease on throttle just as you're coming off the curb, and then aiming to use all of the curb on exit, straightening the car up as you kind of gradually increase throttle, and then reaching full throttle by the time you reach the curb to the right. So let's play this corner through at speed. Okay, so coming down into turn 7, Piper. So turn 7, your brake point is the 50, and you'll see me reach about a 70 to 75% or so brake at that point, and maybe slightly before or right at. You can see the threshold brake point there. Keeping the car to the right, again looking for a late apex off of this corner, setting up for the following corner. So you want to be careful about turning in too soon, so be patient on that. You'll see the turn-in point, and then aiming to apex off of the latter part of the curb there, and keep the car to the left. Again, avoid running too wide to the right so that you can get set up for the following corner right away. So as far as easing on throttle here, again, getting back to full throttle too soon can put you into a spin. So be very careful with that. I don't think I ever do reach full throttle. Yeah, I don't between those two corners there. So that's about the point there where I don't think I ever typically get all the way to the grass either, by the way. So that's about as far as I get. There really isn't generally time to get the car all the way back to the left there, depending on obviously the pace and the line that you're running there. But for me, that's typical to not quite reach that. So let's play this through at speed. So the next corner here, let's see, turn number 9, Hobbs. So for turn 9, what you're doing again is aiming for a late apex and not turning in too soon. So you can see how the turn-in point is kind of getting me so that I can kind of reach the curbing really past the midpoint. So there's my apex, just past the midpoint there, and rolling on throttle just at that just past that midpoint, just as I've reached the right-hand curbing here, so that I can now kind of ease into throttle about 50%. And then obviously there's a lot of turning still going on, just kind of carrying light throttle, unwinding, opening up steering there, and then of course reaching full throttle once the car straightened up and once you've reached the left-hand side here. So let's play that through at speed. All right, so coming down into the next corner here, Mike's Knight corner. I'm sorry, Mike Knight corner. Turn 10 is Mike Knight corner. So turning in too soon again can get you into trouble here, because you don't want to cross over the curbing here to the right. You can use the curbing here obviously, but once you set a tire over, it's pretty rough and bounce the car around quite a bit, and so pretty risky to do it. You can get away with it depending on the angle that you take that at, but you really don't need to run that tight here. You really want to kind of just keep the line slightly wider so that you can carry speed through here and not have to lift too much. There isn't any braking done, and in fact, I don't think I come off throttle fully at any point through this corner. You'll see that as I'm turning in, which is just past the structure here to the left, you'll see me get off throttle, just kind of lift, turning in, and then just kind of modulating throttle based on the amount of speed that I feel like I can safely carry through here. And I actually did just very lightly tap the brake, it looks like. So I had my left foot resting on the brake, and as a left foot braker, I always have my left foot right there ready in case I need to kind of maybe just adjust the balance of the car a bit. And I might have felt like I was running slightly too quick and maybe just tap that a little bit, or maybe just get a little extra rotation there. But usually I'm not braking at all and just kind of thinking about modulating and lifting on throttle, and then making sure that as I come off the corner, come up to the left-hand side of the road pretty quickly, because again, the next corner comes up on you in a hurry, and you really want to be pretty close to this dirt here to where you turn into the next corner. And so before we go into that, let's play this. All right, so the final corner here, turn 11. What you're doing there is just getting the car right up to the left here, right up close to the dirt. You're going to be about a 50% brake, pretty quick and brief, and then turning in. And again, you don't want to apex too soon. It is a little bit more of a later apex to make sure that as you get on throttle, that you're not going to run too wide. But although if you do run wider than this on the exit of the corner, you can take even more gravel without an off track. And so I drop a tire into the gravel, and that's safe to do. There's no off track for that, and you can go even further than this without an off track. But again, you're now getting to a point where it's not any quicker. So that's one reason where I kind of like to think about this corner as a little bit more of a late apex. I don't know that I necessarily late apex it here. It's really about a mid apex still, where I'm hitting this. And you can see that's kind of where the typical line appears to be with the usage that you see here on this curb. But I guess the point here is that apexing too soon is going to get you into trouble. So make sure that you're not turning in too soon and reaching this curb too soon, because that's going to set you off a bit of an awkward line on the exit of the corner, where you won't be able to get to throttle just as you're coming off the curb. So you can see, again, just as I'm exiting the curb here, getting on throttle, we've got about a 90-degree steering angle, starting to ease into throttle, and then opening up the steering at the point where I know that I'm not going to run too wide there, and now committing to full throttle there. So let's play that through at speed. All right, so there's a lap of Okayama. I hope you found it helpful, and I'll talk to you later.